Alrighty, welcome to another edition of Magus Talk. Today we have a very special guest. Her name is Tara, not her real name. She's a normal lady from Australia with a family, and the last person you would expect to be summoning entities that we call Dragon Jinn. I'm not going to get into why we call them Dragon Jinn, and it's really not for effect. It's just to distinguish them from the more demonized evil spirits or demons of the grimoires as they stand. However, they are not, in my honest opinion, separate entities. They are the same ones. We just deal with them differently, more pragmatically, and according to the interactions we have with them. Now, I want to emphasize that I'm very grateful because they helped me beta test the system. We're very different people, so if I would have done this myself, this would have been one-sided. I am different than Jay. Jay is different than Tara. So between us, we kind of triangulate a whole spectrum where a bunch of people can fit in to do this without any fear or trepidation, and in a sense where they can gradually build up to experiences that are at least as profound as the so-called physical manifestation, and even more so pragmatically because you are being transformed by symbiotic entities that are catalytic to that effect. They eventually offer a portion of themselves that is really an interface known as a spirit familiar. And it isn't a spirit like an individual like you see in the movies where the witches talk to the familiars and make pacts and all that. No, this is pure symbiosis. And because the ability is our own, and because the energy is our own, the interaction doesn't deplete these spirits. It doesn't impose on them. In fact, what they do is learn from us. They want to be individuals. Human individuality is a treasure in creation. You can hear many channelers somehow touch upon New Age channelers, and it's not something to be completely thrown out the window, in my opinion. But they touch upon that, how valuable humanity is because of its special place in creation. The same is said in the Abrahamic religions and many other spiritualities. That being said, and the intro set aside, please give a warm welcome to Tara. And I'll just let her tell her story and interject wherever she has a question or wherever I need to make a comment. But this podcast is for her. In the future, I would like to invite her again. We'll see if we can alternate between Jay's presentation and Tara's. So without any further ado, let me introduce Tara. And Tara, thank you for being here. Take it away. Tell us your story and anything else you want to talk about.
Hi, Ari. Hey, Jay. Dr. J. Oh, look, it's so good to be back with you guys, working with the Dragon Jinn. I can't believe it's been, literally years. Look, I thought I'd give a little bit of background for anybody apart from us who may be listening. I began working with Ari on a forum. When was that, Ari? It was 2008? I actually can't remember. And I lost my original computer with most of my notes and our correspondence. So I'm sort of a bit in the dark as to dates and times.
It was either 2005 or 2006. I was already on that forum for quite a while, maybe less than a year, though. So you're pretty close. All right. Continue.
I know it was a time when there was a lot of strange stuff going on energetically where I lived, which was in a powerful part of semi-rural Queensland in Australia. There were lots of things that literally went bump in the night, and both my husband, who isn't into this work, and I separately felt things jumping on us and all sorts of really weird things. I also, actually, because I used to do readings and things like that, and occasionally I would do house clearances. I mean, that's not my area, but, excuse me, I live in a city now, and you may hear traffic noise, like there was an ambulance just going past, or a police siren going on there. So at the time, I had a few house clearances as well, because, there aren't many people in the area that I lived in that do that. And, one person heard, and so I ended up doing a couple of those. And some of it was sort of local ancestral presence that was really, really unsettled and really angry, I think, because there were lots of new housing developments going on in the area. And, a few other things, but I sort of worked with them as well. That's just a by and by. But it was around that time where, there was... Also, I had sort of psychic friends in that area that also felt that kind of movement that was going on as well. But I was also at a really low point in my life, mentally and physically. I had a few things going on that were mentally and emotionally challenging, as well as physically. I'd been thrown into sort of sudden menopause a few years earlier, and so I think that at that point my hormones were kind of bottoming out too, and so many times I'd wake up in every morning and I'd just feel like I had to scrape my energy up off the floor before I could even take a step out of the room. It was so hard. And then all of this led me to search for something or someone that would help me to grow more, to use a sort of new agey kind of term. Look, I've been meditating since 1989, and taught meditation over the years. And I've done lots of sort of woo-woo things that some people, like house clearances and energy healing and etc. So I was familiar with a lot of personal growth practices, but at that point they all kind of fell short for me. I wanted a practice that wasn't just mind stuff, because I felt that a lot of what I've been doing was very mind based. And I know that, everything that we do starts in the head, but I couldn't trust that it wasn't just my imagination. I wasn't just playing with myself, if you get my gist. And I wanted some way of having real feedback in a more tangible way. And so, I'm desperate, and there was nobody in my area who could take me any further than I'd already gone. This is not me being arrogant or, thinking I'm better than everybody. It was just that all the people that I knew were kind of on a similar level in their spiritual development to me. We'd all been teaching it in various ways, and I just needed someone outside of my sphere that would help me to move further, like get out of the real low place that I was in energetically and physically, and mentally. And anyway, I put my call out to the universe, to source, if you like, and I eventually found a forum online, and I came across you, Ari, and I remember you offering me to teach me practices that would give me sort of real energetic feedback that I could actually feel in my own body. And so I knew that you were the teacher, that I was teacher. Isn't that lovely? Well, you are a teacher, Ari, sorry. Mentor, friend, like you've become teacher, mentor, friend to me now over these years. But what you were talking about made me know that was what I needed to do, so that the results I would get, I would know I wasn't just imagining. it also helped me to continue my journey, really, of getting out of my head and into my body, because I feel that's something that I've been doing ever since I started meditating years ago. So that I was very, I was very up in the air. I was probably out of my body half of the time, and so this was going to help ground me. And so, and look, please, edit this out if you think this is going to be boring or unrelevant or irrelevant. But anyway, so the work that you gave me, it was like real. There was lots of breathing, blooming lots of breathing, and I really got good at focusing and charging my energy and feeling it all around and within me. And then, the bone breathing. Do you remember that one? God, that was really tricky, but it was also really helpful. And I had to work hard with that because I kept falling asleep with the energy when I was trying to focus on every specific bone. So that was really good kind of training in that sense.
I remember the lessons that I had made. Those were based on legit techniques of energy work, Taoist techniques. You can find them today everywhere, practically on the net. And bone breathing is just inhaling into your bones and getting, focusing your awareness at the core of the body, which is the bone marrow. It tends to stimulate the immune system, circulation, and other physiological effects, but mainly it helps you ground, because when you stimulate that energy, then you can move it into various parts of the body, in the core, in the abdomen. You can circulate it up the spine and around the front. And if you're ungrounded, it really helps. My amazement was that I thought that people who were into meditation would also be into some form like that. In my case, when I put all this together, I didn't just copy those techniques. What I did, and this was connected to the dragon gin as well, if you look at the human body, the energy work and bone breathing, first of all, the flat bones in the body, according to the procedure itself, the classical procedure, they're considered to have the bone marrow creates white blood cells that that have to do with the immune system. The long bones create red blood cells primarily. And so when you stimulate for example, the shoulder blades, the hip, the pelvic bone, and even the vertebrae of the spine, where the bones flatten out, you're stimulating the immune system. But what's interesting here is that if you look at the energy body, what you see is that each of these bones, the energy flares. It's almost like an electromagnetic field, and well, it is an electromagnetic field of sorts. And it's just not measurable unless you have very, very sensitive equipment, but it is perceivable. So the shoulder blades will flare out on the sides and it will look like wings. The hip bones the same way. The fingers, you have the energy flaring out the fingertips and it makes it look like elongated claws. The spinal column, the vertebrae flare out in the back and it's almost like ridges. What do I mean? I mean that this energy, that vortex, is the vortexes of the energy body, not the aura that's diffuse and soft around the body, but the denser one takes on the form of a kind of reptilian demon. But it isn't. That's a caricature. In reality, when you combine the softer aura, the astral body, so to speak, that's more oval, with the slightly denser electromagnetic field, you have a combination between the more ethereal and the more terrestrial. And when they're separate, you got this demonized form that holds a lot of subconscious patterns that may be unresolved. And then you have this more ethereal form that connects to the higher mind, to the cerebral cortex, etc. Now, many occultists are, or esotericists, unlike the New Age, many esotericists who practice ritual magic and are into researching all of these things, they're very much against mixing science with uh, occultism, you might say, or esoterica. And these are Westerners primarily because they think science is its own thing. And it has nothing to do with this. It's like, well, science hasn't discovered everything, and it has not been disproven. And there have been scientific philosophers like Karl Popper, I believe, who basically said, "Well, you can't disprove anything, so that doesn't make it illegitimate, though. And you really cannot prove anything if you maintain certain biases, because whatever you want to prove, what if it falls out of the jurisdiction? What if you don't have enough facts, enough data? What if your discoveries are dependent on the instrumentation, like quantum theory? It's basically comes out of a few experiments. And then the rest of it is mathematics, more experiments that validated that, et cetera, et cetera. But it's limited. And scientists are stumped because, well, they're dependent on their technology, which has its own range of whatever it can measure. And they're also dependent on the doctrines that are based on that originally and historically were notorious for trying to debunk and separate psychogenic effects or any kind of esoteric happening, mystical stuff, religious stuff, because they wanted to go strictly secular. Now, there is a spectrum and there is an abuse of this because some people just use the word science without really understanding it. You're either a scientist or you're an esotericist. You can be both, but that hasn't really been digested yet. It's new territory. There have been many researchers who've tried to come in from the scientific angle, and there have been mystics who've tried to reach into the scientific angle from their perspective. But then others from each of the two sides are like, well, you don't have it right. You're kind of making it, superficial, or you're messed up. On one forum, somebody talked about an engineer who was in this Taoist teacher's lecture, and the Taoist teacher talked about the energies being electromagnetic. And the engineer said, that's not how electrical circuits work. And my reply is that electrical circuits are made of wires and metals and semiconductors. My field of physics was semiconductor interfaces and metal interface surfaces, basically, and their behaviors, because these are very important in photovoltaic cells and electronics and all of that. So that behavior is way different than biological behaviors, biological electromagnetism. Bioelectromagnetism is a completely different field. And no engineer, with a few exceptions, can analyze it unless they expand their mind a little bit to incorporate more than their university and graduate level studies have taught them. That is my take on it, at least. So, bone breathing, the way I understood it, was an emphasis on the energy body like this. And I had never seen it anywhere else. I was like, is it a coincidence that when you expand the field, for example, around the human bone structure, it looks like bat wings and claws and bone ridges, and the vortexes coming out of the head look like horns. Uh, and interestingly enough, religions, especially the Christian religion, demonize this. And it's not so much, oh, the pagans, they worship the horn god. Well, why was the god horned anyways? Was it just because they had bulls that had horns and rams and all of this? Or was it because that was a kind of analogy, because it was the closest association shamans or ancient mystics could come to the perception of these energies? If you look at Michelangelo's Moses, he had horns. And of course, this was artistic license and all of that. But if you look at the horns, they don't look like an animal's horns. They look like a twisted kind of energy thing made out of stone. So I want to emphasize that this is connected to the dragon gin because the dragon gin represent this level of energy awareness. Whereas the more subtle levels are also their domain of the astral and all of that. And you can, and that's what we did when we first connected with the Dragon Gin, with Tara and Jay. What we did was stimulate the sigils, but the form of communication with this was this more ethereal dynamic. Now we want to go deeper, because if you go deeper prematurely without the ethereal dynamic to support it, you can get collective unconscious trash that manifests as a whole bunch of emotional reactions that are stimulated by interaction with these jinn. So that being said, and I had deleted a whole bunch of other things I said too about the fact that Westerners have a hard time integrating systems together. They haven't learned quite how to do it because from being a completely repressed, spiritually repressed society as far as cultivation goes, into one that was all of a sudden in the 20th century open to all of these other cultures and their traditions, and with more text being translated lately, even more information has come out. And so normally it would take a couple hundred years for the dust to settle and things to find a certain groove. But usually other social forces intervene. In Hellenistic times, for example, alchemy was prolific until the Roman Empire outlawed it. Was it because these people claimed they were making gold and they didn't want to ruin their economy, or because it empowered them spiritually and it kind of went against the fact that, well, you got to worship the emperor here. What are you doing? Or maybe because people were starting to think for themselves a little more and they had to nip these things off the butt. After torturing the Christians for a bunch of centuries, they finally made Christianity the state religion because it was finally palatable. They got the mysticism out of it, the esoteric stuff out of it, and they could be used politically and to, control people, to organize them, and all of that. It was far more efficient to have everybody believe in the same thing than do what the Romans did, who claimed that, well, just worship the emperor and you can do whatever else you want. But the whatever else you want eventually led them to question worshiping the emperor and question slavery and question the validity of all this stuff. So there is a socio-political element here. And this goes into the collective unconscious as well. When you get into this work, you're going away from the trodden path. Now, this isn't the left hand or the right hand or the evil or the good. This is a different path. This is one for adults where you throw away those concepts and you're not amoral and you're not a relativist. You realize that, well, evil has been misunderstood. It is shall we say, a terrible thing, but most of it isn't evil. It's been just thrown into that. And that is what the so-called good side really needs to become potent, because in all of the depictions in modern literature, even though there's a happy ending and all of this, usually the evil side is stronger. And it always comes out that way until the good side has help from some divinity, outside agent, luck. Authors of fiction have a hard time with this. And the really good ones can concoct something. But in reality, you need to say why. Why is this so-called area of good morality so repressed and so conditioned and also tyrannical in some ways? And that's the allure for those who like go to the so-called left-hand side or the dark side, or the edgelord fashionability. All of this relates to what the Dragon Jinn are, because what drew me here was the fact that in the Lesser Key of Solomon, in the Ars Goetia portion with the 72 Jinn, You also have the spirits of the Shem HaMephorash, which are divine names that are traditionally converted into angels. Now, I took out the angelic part because I considered that artificial. The original Shem HaMephorash was divine names. So all you need, they're three-letter names, and all you need is a couple of vowels inserted in there. And that's beyond the scope of this discussion. But when that happens, these so-called evil jinn all have a source of light that's compatible with them because they've been organized in such a way by certain occultists as to fit the zodiac wheel. And thus the celestial element and the terrestrial element come together, which means that the angelic and the demonic can come together. The only problem is this so-called evil element that is incompatible. So if the true demons are irredeemable, these are not true demons. The people that say that, past, present, future, are blatantly mistaken. Or they say it on purpose because they do not want empowerment. Interestingly enough, scholarship would tell you that the magicians, so-called, that actually used grimoires the most were Catholic priests in the Middle Ages. And these spirits, 69 of them at least, come from a list that was compiled by a monk. And so the list itself is, and this monk tells you, there were additions. Oh, these are fallen angels, and they are completely irredeemable. Some of them want to go to the seventh throne. They want to be redeemed. But of course, that's a fallacy and it'll never happen. I disagree. And I think that there was a lot of editing involved because originally somebody must have had the revelation or the communication from these entities or these forces or these principles that, yes, we are flawed, so to speak, but we seek to evolve toward a greater consciousness. So why would you take that away from them? And anyone then who comes in and says, hey, I believe you, let's do it. But you're not going to mess with me. Because these guys messed with me for 15 years before, actually 10 years. It was 10 years, and I wasn't tortured. It was only in the first few years. And then I just closed the book and set them aside. And every time I would open the book, I'd feel like a growling monstrosity, no matter what sigil I looked at. It was quite hostile. So I began with the friendliest ones, if you could say that. And slowly I was able to open up a kind of communication with them. But this is neither here nor there. Let me just let Tara speak and see what else she has to say with her internal work before we actually get into the nitty-gritty.
Oh, and then there were the mantras. I'd been working with Tara mantras for a few years, and hence the name that I'm using here. And then you gave me Kali mantras to work with, which were much longer and much more, had a sort of much more deeper impact, I think. And then came the first round of working with the Dragon Gin. And that's also where I met you, Jay, through our DJ work. And I remembered like how I had to, the first time was focusing on each of their sigils. And what I did to sort of focus on it and kind of personalize it myself, I actually cut out little circles of material and I embroidered each sigil, for each one for each of the Dragon Gin that I was focusing on. And then, so I was really having to focus my whole attention onto making that before I got to focus on the Dragon Gin. And then I'd put it under my pillow. And occasionally I'd have dreams. And yeah, that was really cool. Cause I do have a tendency, if I do something, I want to do it real fast. So I made myself slow down by physically embroidering the things. So that was my own kind of like little personalized part of the practice there. And then, yeah, and then I'm not sure how I fizzled out. It seems I nearly finished the second round with the DJs, and I'd had some fairly minor positive experiences with some of them, like the first ones after focus, the ones that sort of protect your space, and also Ammon, if I remember. I had a few dreams about some of them. Anyway, that's right. When I was on the forum, I remember before I started working with you, Ari, and I was sort of like just generally, doing other forum work, like I was doing remote viewing and practice and stuff like that. One night before I went to sleep, I had a really strong sensation, and I felt these little dragon-like things entering me, and I got a sense of that there were 72 of them. You know how you get sort of sense of amounts when you get this, kind of thing happening. You kind of get a knowing. Anyway, they sort of entered me through the, let's call it the pelvic floor region. Anyway, looking back, I'm pretty sure that was the dragon jinn letting me know they wanted to work with me. It was so real at the time. I can still remember it.
I remember. And not only that, but you just reminded me of some other details that are, I guess the listeners might be interested to hear. Because the way I did this was that I noticed that every rank had an ascending population of jinn starting from Furkas, who is supposed to be a soldier. From the lowest rank to the highest rank, each rank is associated with a planet in the Lesser Key of Solomon and a metal, which makes it kind of alchemical. And metals are symbolize states of consciousness, moods, dispositions, things like that. Now, this isn't universal, of course, but there is an association. So, what I did was say, okay, let's start from the rank of Saturn. The rank of Saturn is one jinn, and this one jinn is the soldier, he's the unit, because Furkas teaches you pyromancy. And what that means symbolically isn't just looking at the flame and foretelling the future, it is the fire element that's connected to the jinn themselves. Furkas is the jinn that gives you the sense of all the rest of them as jinn, or as the kind of spirits they are, beings that they are. And then you have the princes, which have a benign Jupiterian effect. So these are essentially easier to handle. And then from there you move on. And I worked rank by rank progression because then they're easier to incorporate. I don't use that in this system anymore. Right now, I take the order of the jinn as they're given in the Lesser Key of Solomon and put them around the zodiac wheel according to the template that's called the Secret Seal of Solomon. And I used to send Tara and Jay these a lot of written material, and I overwhelmed them probably. And I can understand how Tara might have been, well, this is way over my head. This is too much, because we had started in a gentle manner. And you've heard some of Jay's stories, but Tara was with them. Dream of the 72 jinn was almost like a prophecy. So she was coming into proximity with the possibility. And because she was going to interact with me, that probability was prominent. And she foresaw it. And the jinn themselves, which kind of transcend time as we know it, because they do tell us the past, present, and future, according to the Grimoire, they communicated because it was meant to be, because she sent out a prayer. So you might think, oh, demons are answering the prayer. No, that's not the case. Anything that can help is answering the prayer because she has potential and was ready to open up to it. And because of all the forum situations that were traditional, because there's almost a reason why people are segregated. Some go toward the New Age, some go toward occultism, some go toward religion that demonizes all of that stuff. And they shouldn't be. You can blend them all because, regardless of what people say, if you do it right. But people who try to do it right encounter all kinds of obstacles because there are obstacles. In essence, you have to take the boundaries between them and dissolve them yourself. And that is almost an alchemical act because that will change you, not for the worse, but it will change you in the sense that now you are handling from within more than you've ever handled before in your life. And nobody's attacking you and all of this outside of the what's going on with humanity themselves. And I'm not going to say that there aren't so-called malevolent presences, but they're not these. These become malevolent just like any human being can go insane with toxicity. So a lot of the lore around them, in my honest opinion, needed to be revised, and I was out to prove that by doing this. But it wasn't because to prove that. It's because, well, how do we do this? Because I've tried this for years. After they ceased being hostile, they started getting lukewarm, and it was very difficult to get anything out of them. And then the understanding came that, well, you need to approach this completely differently. And just because other people who slap techniques together and call it a new system are out there and giving it all a bad reputation doesn't mean that you have to as well. This is me thinking to myself. So Hera moved up to a point, and then, as she's going to tell us, in her final concluding exposition, life moved on. And I didn't want to pressure her. So when I came up with the new system, I wrote a ton of material, and I've organized it and all of this. I could write some books about this, but I need to do it right. And so the better way, instead of writing books about it, is to present what it is in this triangulated mode, where there's three of us doing the work in different ways, but it's still the same work. And how can you do it in different ways? Well, people in esoteric work, especially the ones in occultism, they almost like they read from a script. And some of them just go off and do their own thing, but there's no grounding there. There's no structure. The ones who are pro structure are too structured, the purists, as they call them. If a certain text doesn't say it, then you can't do it. So now that all of these things are coming together, there's an opportunity more than before because people used to tell me, well, why don't you just publish this stuff? And I'm like, no, there's too much inconsistency in the whole field. And this needs to mature to come to a point where nobody can argue with it, not in terms of the results, because most people on occult forums, most occultists, in fact, would scoff at it, having a few dreams and dragons coming up the pelvic floor and ha 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 and hoo hoo hoo. These days, I've noticed a different trend because once things go to a certain extreme, people start questioning, well, your extreme doesn't work good either. After I complicated things a little too much as I was working through this, because this is really creative occultism. And a lot of these suppositions I made and a lot of the designs and the reconstructions I made obviously went over the heads of both. And right now, things can be a lot simpler. I reached the point where I wrote a ton of material, I practiced a ton of stuff, and things are structured as they should. And now it's time to trim the fat, so to speak, to streamline it, to bring it to a point without making it too simplistic, without cutting out the essence, where it's actually manageable. And as somebody from the more new age psychic research type direction, is probably a better candidate than Jay is for that, because Jay is more naturally shamanic in a Beastmaster type mode. If anybody remembers the movie, I talked about that before. He used to associate with it as well. So we did a full round of these 72, which I called level one because it was basically dealing with the psychological level. They went through, both Jay and Tara went through a bunch of stuff in their lives that essentially was a form of purification. And I'm not talking people think purification saves the day, but this is the stuff that needed to be released that was extra baggage. And so, even as I was sending the new material, Tara was going through a bunch of stuff in her life, a lot of adventures. And I figured, okay, I'm just going to work with Jay now, and she needs to come full circle. So we had gone through one cycle of the 72 using the rank progression that I had described, and then a second time. And the second time was almost like it wasn't even completed. The first time was psychological. So both Tara and Jay were used to it because Jay had his own issues, of course. And these people weren't like occultists and practitioners or meditators in any serious, Tara was, but not in the sense that I'm talking about. So they weren't really, really biased in many ways. They had other biases. The psychological effects were enough because they didn't worry about, oh, I got to see the thing in physical life, like in the movies, and it's got to tower above me and roar and that's my friends. And no, it's not that. Come on, we're not children. I'm sorry, those people who feel offended out there, even the ones that are like for years into this stuff and highly respectful in their fields, please get over this physical manifestation crap. It's bullshit. If you try to do that, you're going to have such a dense energy body that you're bound to collect more than you can handle. I'm not saying it's not possible in the right way, but if you're going to come to that point, you need to bring yourself and them into an equilibrium. And the very nature of the way these spirits are described in the grimoire gives us hints on how to do that. And that's for another time again. So, as I relate to both Tara and Jay in these podcasts, I'm going to use these interjections as an opportunity to describe what the system is about. Now, this isn't going to give anybody instructions to go practices. This is purely for information purposes, so you know what's going on. But the more creative of you can experiment because you're experimental types anyways. That's the thing with occultists as opposed to new age types. The occultist will experiment even if they tell them it's risky. At the same time, this doesn't have to be risky. And what's going on right now is that the first level is psychological, the second level is magical. This is where you have psychic effects because the second level's true nature is about relationships. The first one is about me and myself. The second one, number two, me and others, the environment. The third level expands beyond that into the whole grand collective of humanity. And that is very, very challenging. That's why it took a long time because I was communing with the jinn not to get psychic powers and this and that. My intuition had gone through the roof anyways. And mantras are actually enough for that if you're dedicated enough. And I had spent many, many years in that kind of meditative dynamic and with energy work. But the jinn brought me back to square one in many respects, where I almost thought, wow, 30 years of, back then, of all of this inner work, and what do I have to show for it? And here people are telling me to write a book. Are you crazy? So don't throw out these subtle effects. That's how you got to start. Because if you're not comfortable there, you're not going to be comfortable later on. And if you're impatient there, you're not going to have a foundation. Your house is going to be one of a house of cards. What she's doing now, as she's going to get back into this, because we're doing work separately from these podcasts, of course, and some of the results are going to come out in the podcast. Others won't. They're not ready to. We're not going to blab everything here. Some rough edges may need to be cleared out. I don't know. But the point is that level three, the human collective, is a very, very challenging level to deal with. This is where the archetypes come alive, where the gods are encountered, where all kinds of truly demonic forces exist, because these demonic forces are universal in humanity. Certain individuals can shield themselves, they can align with angelic or divine or spiritual light, but you're only keeping yourself apart from what might be termed the inevitable. And if you don't deal with it, you're increasing the probability that there will be a collective, I wouldn't call it a reckoning, but a collective revelation or apocalypse that may be under the so called term of tribulation. And it's not because we're bad people and we must be punished, it's because we kind of don't want to deal with the rough stuff, or we deal with it in a contrived way. We're doing the best we can, most of us. But whenever people are given an opportunity to kind of bypass what they need to deal with, they'll take it. I've done it myself. There's no shame in that. That is human nature, which means when you know yourself, you address that. You don't criticize yourself to the point of oblivion. You treat it as if, okay, if I really want to get beyond this or through this without losing something and without compromising, then I got to handle it in a mature manner here. I can't condemn myself and boo-hoo myself, but I'm not gonna argue and because arguing for or against this kind of integration, arguing against anything in many cases is just an excuse because you are judging yourself, because you're afraid to be proven wrong or whatever. And there are people who want to prove you wrong, and they're also messed up. We're all messed up in some way. That doesn't mean we're irredeemable, and it doesn't mean that we're not mature enough to take the reins and make our lives better. And we have help. This isn't just some spiritual thing that defies the religions. No, it doesn't defy anything. Things have been misunderstood. I'm talking about practical interaction. What they do for us, the offices that they provide for us, are bestowed by the interface entities that are known as familiars. And once they bond with us, they don't have a mind of their own. They're an extension of our own mind. So we're given a pattern into which we can grow and expand. So we augment ourselves through these familiar spirits. And the familiar isn't some sneaky emissary. A lot of people will say that too. It's a sneaky emissary from the jinn intelligence to infiltrate your psyche and possess you and all of this. No, that can be true depending on the individual. If I was an underhanded individual, yes, I could be fooling people. And there can be others that'll try to copy this. But I dare them, because one of the reasons it took me decades to compile all of this stuff and formulate it is because I wanted to create a system where the jinn themselves will refuse to work with you if you're not legit. And I'm not talking legit as a promoter or whatever. I'm talking as a human being. If you're not sincere, if you're not honest with yourself, especially, and if you're not honest about doing this work for the purpose that the jinn agreed to it, because you don't have to sign contracts with them, because the contract is embedded in the system. The contract is essentially mutual evolutionary fulfillment, mutual evolutionary advancement. They get something out of it, you get something out of it. And so they're not going to screw you, because if you think about it selfishly, they'd be screwing themselves. So excuse me for the tirade, but I'll let her conclude now. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what happens once we complete, because Jay asked me that question, and I wanted to give a further reply to it. What happens, we're doing this round again in level 3, and we're going to do the full round with 8 jinn each time, and simultaneously held in our attention. When we can master that, we move to 8 more jinn, etc., etc. Once we complete that, what happens? Well, I'll tell you that after Tara tells her thing.
Anyway, life moved on. You got to refining the DJs further, and I think that's why I stepped away and I got on with life. I had an adventure on a boat more recently for 5 years with my husband. And then the last couple of years, it's taken me that time just settling back into Australian life and regular life. And just recently, though, the last few weeks, I started getting a sense of the DJs again, just out of the blue. So I contacted you and found that you're starting round 3 with them and with Jay. And so I've been like watching or listening to your podcasts and reading your Substack articles and stuff, and we've been emailing, and it's been really good just to get that sense that yes, now is a good time for me to get into this. So here I am. So unlike you, Jay, I'm kind of starting slowly again, because I haven't been, because when I was living a boat life and doing that kind of thing, I had to focus on being almost like a different person. So there was no room for me really to do this kind of work. So I'm sort of coming back into it. So I know, Jay, you've been working with them non-stop, really, haven't you? Which I'm super impressed with.
So right now, he's doing the work consistently. And we're taking it one step at a time. So if you want to, and you do, obviously, want to join in, you are going to do it at your own pace. The practices are going to be tailored to you, but they're not going to be that different from his. See, this is where we all dovetail together. Not completely, but far more than previously. Because the whole point of taking time off is to integrate and digest whatever has happened and consolidate it with your own life path, what they call karma, excuse me. So you're integrating this, and this isn't going to be harsh either. This is advanced. Yes, it is. And that's why it's going to be more accommodating, because this time it's far more adaptable to your needs without me having to specifically tailor it that way. What happens is that for Jay, for example, he has an intuitive sense of the jinn, and they tell him thumbs up. Then he comes to me and says, well, this is moving, but what do I do now? And right now, what's going on is as he's moving through this first phase, he has to confront his own personal situation. All of the sudden, remember when we used to say our life issues, once you think you overcame them, they're going to come back at a different level. And then you wonder, but will I ever overcome them? And the answer is you have overcome it. You're using the drama of the life situation because that is the only crisis you know. It is your crisis. You've lived it. So all negativity is going to be interpreted through that lens because that is the best way for you, or the only way maybe that you can actually digest it because you have tangible experience. It translates into a series of events, and thus you can put a handle on it. You can grasp it. You can incorporate it. You can ground it. It's real. So you may be done with it on a psychological level, but then it'll be projected onto relationships. Then you may be done with it with relationships, and all of a sudden, poof, global events, lo and behold. And if not global events, this abstract sense, because when the world isn't going crazy outwardly, we're all going to go crazy inwardly. So, in spite of the suffering that's going on that may have increased, at the same time, this is happening because human beings cannot repress it anymore. And there's always been suffering going on. It's just that now we have the media to show it. So the good old days weren't so good. And the present day is not so great either. But the point is that our human condition is unsustainable, but not for the reasons that are promoted. Oh, we're doing this and we're doing that, and we got to control this and that in order to make sure our planet doesn't explode. Well, actually, there are forces, most of the evil in the world that's acute and harmful is done from a minority. Everybody else is more or less uh, not neutral, but they're influenced, they're programmed, they're affected. They don't. People are not as free as they think they are. Even if you let them do whatever they want, they're still going to be conditioned by something. And if they can ignore that within themselves, it's going to bother them in their relationships because everybody has to be conditioned in the same way, or else they're going to be tripping over each other. You're not aware enough when you're conditioned. You're more unconscious than you are conscious. So you need predetermined behaviors to put everybody lockstep. And then you have people manipulating that, playing playing conductor of the orchestra to this dissonant tune of their own seven deadly sins, so to speak, their own excesses, their own disharmonies, their own perversions. There is psychopathy in the world, and that's just the human psychological interpretation of evil. Psychopathy, evil is a thing in and of itself, but as far as existence is concerned, evil is insanity. It's not just its own category that we go and snuff it out and it's gone. No, it's spiritual insanity. This is where I probably differ from a lot of people in the sense, even having gone through a spiritual direction, having gone through experiences that may be termed enlightenment, but not in a permanent sense. Or as soon as the experiences happen, I realize I got to go back down and stick my nose in the mud where everybody else is, because otherwise I'm just escaping, or I'm leaving things behind. And you get to know that evil is not something that you can hate, because evil is hatred. There is a distinction between emotions like rage, fear, and other forms of primitive animalistic impulses, for example, and hatred. Hatred is not an animalistic impulse. Animals can have it. Anything traumatized gets hatred pumped into it. And then it seeks to traumatize others to release that hatred. That's the cycle. But as this happens, the nature of our existence is demolished. And when I say the nature, I mean the feminine essence, the receptive essence. And this has nothing to do with feminism and human females. Males and females have feminine essence. Nature has feminine essence. The planet is mostly feminine essence. It is the tangible um, depth of substance that responds to the drive of consciousness, whose essence is spirit. This essence is not always divine. There is fallen spirit, and it's not fallen. It didn't go, oh, I did something and I fell down and now I can't get up. No, it's purposefully saw nature, hated it because of its alienation, and we're not going to get into that, but it is tormenting. So nature is innocent. And when I say nature, I mean everything that feels in you. It's your initiative where evil comes in and pushes and tortures you in order to keep that destructive mode going. It's crazy, it's obsessive, and humans have had techniques to be able to dispel it for a time, but it keeps coming back on the one hand, and on the other, there's plenty of it embedded through Earth's prehistory, beyond even humanity, that hasn't been expelled yet. So we humans are the antidote to it. And for the antidote to evolve itself into that role, so to speak, they need to live it. And they can't help it. And by they, I mean us. So we're not alone in evolution. And we're not completely understanding where we are, even the greatest sages. And because I'm perceiving this doesn't mean I'm superior to anybody or everybody. That concept, just please throw it out the window. Superior, inferior. This isn't about that. If somebody isn't for this work or any work, leave them alone. If they come after you, well, you need to fortify yourself somehow. And this is one way to do it. I'm not promoting this, but I would like to share it. On the other hand, like I said, this system is designed for, how do you say, it's designed for people who are sincere, who have transcended the good and evil thing as a dogma and are able to thus more objectively discern when things are negative or positive and the motives of others and everything like that. And you don't have to blab and argue about it. The point is, you can do something about it in one way or another. We have potentials. And think about it logically. If a bunch of people collect like a bunch of traditions together and everybody does their own thing, somebody's going to come up with something. And it's not because they come up out of it with their head. If they do something that cultivates their discernment, their creativity, their intuition, their intangible abilities known as psychic abilities, their magical potential, so to speak, over the years, that's going to precipitate into something. And the surprising thing for me was as this precipitated, I wasn't compelled to go and preach the word or teach people. And, people would ask me, why don't you? No, I'm not qualified for that. Well, all these other people are doing it. Well, I don't want to be them. What I want to do is know that when the time comes, that I can present something that I would be satisfied with. That's my criteria. Is when I started off, I was like, well, I wish I had this, that, and the other. Where is it? And here's one way, because I have a few other systems up my sleeve as well. And I'm leaving those on the back burner. They're actually not as involved as this one, but I developed it myself from existing. Let's put it this way. You take the runes, you take the hexadecimal numerological system, you take, how do you call them? The geomantic sigils, for those of you who know occultism. And then you take these very interesting sigils from the Republic of Mali, the culture there, and they've created this system of 10 feminine divine energies that inspire the geomantic sigils in their divination process. I'm not going to get into that either. I'm probably messing it up a little bit, but the thing is, the geomantic forms, they're kind of moderators between the African system of 16 essences and the Norse system of 16 essences. And this isn't apples and oranges. This is like puzzle pieces because you have a north-south dynamic, and the north-south represents the Earth's axis, which is um, a stabilizing presence around which the Earth revolves. So here you can take the inconsistencies of the North, the inconsistencies of the South, and bind them together so they can become something solid. This is a kind of art, and shall we say science, maybe, of esoteric integration and creativity and design. And it's something a lot of people think they can do off the top of their heads, but I would beg to differ. So what we did first with him uh, to initiate the system is a practice known as the fusion of the five elements. So interestingly, you said that the bone breathing helped you to ground. Well, the fusion of the five elements will help you stabilize and bring your emotions into an integrity with the body mind in such a way that you can transform those energies into virtues, into strengths, where the body, mind, and the emotional aspects and the physical body come together, and your prana, your chi, can actually pattern through your emotional body, your emotional matrix, your everything that goes through you, and you will empower it. So this is another system that's also a Taoist system, and Doctor no Montauk Chia was a very who's still around, and he popularized the system of Eastern practices. I mean, it's better than psychotherapy because it actually gives you a hands-on, tangible relationship with your emotional matrix, so to speak, and how to convert one energy into something else. Your liver, for example, when it's repressed and glutted, or when your emotions are repressed and glutted, it induces rage, which also harms the liver itself. Whereas if you can, when you channel it and purify it, the rage can empower you in the sense of loving kindness, in the sense of mercy, in the sense of also intellectual acumen and imagination, and the mind becomes far more stable. The energies of rage are transmuted into passion, and the passion relaxes into loving kindness, and they relate to each other. So you're not just a submissive, spiritual, vulnerable person. Similarly, the lungs are where the prana, they are not the prana or the air element, they are where the element grounds into the body. So they reflect the instincts, that which absorbs, or the body mind, the more physical aspects of your mentation. And these physical aspects, again, the thing the lungs do is hold in grief. So you experience loss, then there's harm there, and the large intestines, which is the complementary active organ. The way the Taoists saw it was geometrically almost. You have the ears look like the kidneys. And of course, the bladder is that which expresses what the kidneys are filtering. You have the lungs that correlate with the large intestines because the heart, which is between them, correlates with the small intestines that's between them, the upper and lower side of the body. In any case, we'll get into that privately because I think it's time that you start with this. And if you start with this, all of your fears of the jinn, whatever you may have in your subconscious, any kind of trepidation for the future will dissolve. You will have a resource, and it's not against the jinn that you have to protect yourself. It's against whatever's going to come through because there are forces in the world that when they see you take a step to transcend your programming, to transcend the conditions of your innate repression, uh, they kind of rise up against you. And this is what the religions call evil. But in this case, your life goes haywire also because the human collective doesn't like to have its boats rocked. The populace that loves groupthink and mind, the group mind, and all of that, even those who think they're all based and individualistic, that's still a form of groupthink. And it doesn't mean all forms of agreement are groupthink, but a lot of times you do get to it. And the telling sign is if the opposition, for example, shuts up, and then the side that thinks they have the upper hand will become more dogmatic, will become more, shall we say, tyrannical, even though they won't admit it or think it's for everybody's own good. At least that's what they like to tell themselves. So we go from one extreme to the other, and the middle of the road is usually some neutral ground everybody claims to occupy. But it's kind of an empty space, and you can't sit on the fence because it's very spiky and will hurt your nether regions. So again, I blab and I ramble. I do still want to dedicate a few minutes to explaining where this is going to go and how. But at least Tara, you're familiar with this, fusion of the five elements, and you can do this. And Jay and you are going to be in lockstep because he's kind of taken a while to master it. So there's no rush. And in the meantime, I will familiarize you with the theory, with how to go about things, with what these represent, because you have an advantage over Jay. He's not into tarot cards, he has no clue. He's not into astrology, he really doesn't have much of a clue there either. And you're into both, so you know half the system already. You're also into spirituality, like the biblical stuff. At least you're familiar with it. And Jay is too, from another perspective. But if I speak Kabbalah with you, you will be more comfortable than he is because, again, he has no clue. And that's not to disparage the guy. It's just that he is more easier with the body energy stuff, the Tai Chi. So for him, even for him, though, the fusion of the elements was difficult because it is not an easy method to learn. And yet at the same time, it's much more user friendly. And it's almost considered not an introductory method, but uh, not hyper advanced. And if you do it right, it won't stress you, and it's very good on the body. So we're going to get into that. I was going to go into the rest of the stuff, but time has dragged on. I don't want this to go over too much over an hour. I want to apologize for some of the crazy edits in here because I'm not used to using the name Tara, and I keep calling this lady by her real name. So, and that really messes up the continuity. So hopefully I'm not I'm gonna bow out. So without further ado, adios amigos, and we'll see you next time, same bad station. Take it away, Tara.
Anyway, here I am restarting. I'm strengthening my breathing and energy sensing again to stabilize and ground myself and to get a very strong core energy again and to get that ability to be very aware of it all. I have started by breathing into the three centers with a center pillar and then extending the energy outwards in the 6 directions and around a circle at my center, which I did a long time ago. I had a quiet point at work, so I was doing a bit of breathing energy then, and I was feeling hungry, so I thought I'd play with the energy. And I made a ball of energy, which I put up into my head, and I imagined I was like a radio beacon with lightning bolts of energy going out, broadcasting a message going, Tara's tea break, Tara's tea break. And about 2 seconds after I finished doing that, one of my co-workers, he jerked his head up and looked around and said, have you had your tea break yet? I was actually really surprised. Like, I was super impressed. And I was also impressed that they picked it up as well. Anyway, so now, Ari, I've moved on to your practice 1 exercises. So creating the golden sphere, cycling the energy, establishing the 5 energy centers and middle pillar, reddening the pillar and summoning the earth serpent. So that's what I've been working on. I now feel I've got a little feedback just on that, as I've condensed it to about 20 minutes of practice in one sitting. Well, standing, because I'm standing. Establishing the energy centers and middle pillar is fairly simple for me, and I know the more I do that, the stronger and brighter my energy will become. I can already feel some of the centers warming up as I work them. Bringing the fiery energy to them was interesting, but I still need to sit with that as I, just to work with that stage, I think, rather than rushing through it. Summoning the earth serpent was fairly doable, but again, I need to take more time with that section as well. I noticed that once I started spiraling it up and then rotating the 2 circles in both directions, I was swaying a lot and moving as I was standing there. I just noticed that, I don't know whether it was me visualizing it or whether it was the energy moving or a bit of both, that my body was actually moving quite a bit while I was doing it as well. And I also felt a little bit giddy while I was doing it. And that was not unexpected, really. It reminds me of the early work, actually, with you, Ari, when I'd rotate circles in energy in 2 directions around my body. So I've got a kind of energetic muscle memory to do that, if you like. I just need to practice it a bit more to get back into that. I like the serpent energy of it and how it blends into a wall of liquid standing around me, though. That's really cool. It's kind of cool as well, isn't it? Because the fire energy is sort of warming on the inside, and then you've got this, cool midnight blue energy on the outside. So sitting after the practice, I do feel very energized. Not in the sense that I want to go on a 10-kilometer run or anything crazy like that, because that's not me. More in the sense that I feel buzzing, like my cells and almost the air around me feel more alive and buzzing, if, actually sort of maybe quietly vibrating, if that makes any sense. I do have a couple of questions. One question I have is, how do I leave that whole practice when I finish? What I did do, I shrank the serpent energy to a fine circle to around my navel area, still at the distance of my height from my core. And I sort of shrank the 5 centers, bringing an essence of them to the one place at my navel area. But is that right? Or, I can't imagine I should keep them all up and running. And I don't know that I want to completely shut them down. I really can't remember what would be best, so I'd really appreciate your feedback on that, Ari, please.
Okay, some quick replies here. Your question basically is about closure. And closure is not difficult in the sense that you're almost there. All you need to do is what you've been doing. You bring it into your navel, and then there's a practice that you can do that closes the navel. It's not necessary, though. As long as the Taoists essentially, and Matak Chia and anybody else, for beginners especially, you cycle energy something like 25, 24 cycles one way, 36 cycles another. It's actually 6 and 9, multiples of 6 and 9. So you spiral energy into your navel and spiral energy out, and then you kind of lock it. And then you do it in the opposite direction and you open it up. I don't do that. I don't know what the repercussions are because I haven't really felt any. But if you can just bring the energy into your navel, cycle it like down your front and up your back and down your legs and down the back of the legs and up the front, and again up the back and down the soft part of the inside of the arms and then around through the fingers and up the elbow to your neck and up and around the head. That's called the macrocosmic orbit. I haven't described it very well. We'll talk about it in greater detail, but all you need to do is essentially ground. There is one practice that I would recommend, and that is, imagine you have golden rings around your wrists and your ankles, all at the same time. This visualization, especially when your focus is on it, will stimulate your acupressure points that are called distal points. They're the hands and the wrists and the ankles and a little bit the calves. I don't know exactly where they are, the feet. There's these acupressure points. If they're stimulated, they tend to cycle energy through your whole body. So you focus on the extremities and you decrease the stress in the center. So what I do, which is not a standard practice, and many might disagree about this, but it works for me. You have these rings around like golden energy, the same golden energy that you do with the inner smile, and it kind of keeps your energy going in the body. And then you focus on your navel and you balance those two out. And you balance it out because the periphery and the middle pillar, they do balance each other. That way you're not too extended, you're not overwhelmed by the energy, and you're centered. And remember to keep your feet grounded and your arms and energies open. And once you have it in the navel, let it creep up into the heart and the head even less. Like it tapers off to a tip when it gets to the head. That's one way to do it. However, the focus, I think you're ready for the organ energies. And when you get into the organ energies, because again, you know the tarot, you know astrology, and you know the symbolism and all of this, but this kind of knowledge can work against you because it's head-centered knowledge. So it can be. So you know the symbolism, then you have an intellectual habit to leave the body behind and the emotions behind, when you address the symbolism, calling it spiritual then. So we'll do the organ fusion. I think that's the most important thing. And then you can dispense with all the other stuff. That's what we did with Jay. It's like, Jay, you've done it. You've done these cyclings with the energy around the body, the Leviathan energy, as I would call it, the energy of the circumferential field, the magic circle, and the energy of the various directions of three-dimensional space. You established your presence there. So now you can just go directly and go into the elemental fusion. So what the elemental fusion will do is transform the quality of this energy by incorporating all the factors that I mentioned. And you'll be able to do that very easily. So don't worry about the closure thing. I'm going to send you that. I don't have this off the top of my head. So if you want a closure method, I will send it to you again, along with a brochure with the elemental fusion. Guy Ritchie is the guy that basically has the brochure. He offers it for free. Anybody out there listening, you can Google it. He simplified all of these methods. He's not plagiarizing Montauk Chia because these things are not, they're taught, they're Taoist methods. So they're pretty, I don't know if they're common practices, but Montauk Chia organized them. He didn't invent them all. Even the inner smile that he uses comes from an Indian yogi. And some commentators would say, "Oh, but he plagiarized." Oh, come on, come on. When people create it off the top of their heads, or however they create it, they call them, frivolous or eclectic or irresponsible because they're not to the truth. When somebody follows the actual established stuff and puts them together, they're plagiarizing. So make up your mind. I'm not ragging on everybody out there, but just the few points that get me here. In any case, I'll send you the material, and you can look at it. There's very few things that you really need to do. I had given you an elaborate method, and you can set that aside. It wasn't a waste, and I didn't change my mind or anything. It's just that I wanted to incorporate things, and other things were not ready yet. Now they're ready. Remember, I interact with the spirits as well. There's a kind of right place, right time where these things come through as we're developing. Once we can all harmonize it, then it'll become more universal, and it'll be much easier to do at the same time. Everything learns, including the jinn. So, with that, let's see, you have one more question.
Thank you. And yeah, so generally, I think a few more practices will strengthen my ability with that. And I'll want to move on to the elements, angels and directions and suits. But I also want to work on the inner smile with the organs as well. I think you've sent me information on that, Ari, but I'll need to get really mentally clear on that before I start that level. So any thoughts about that, any tips I'd really appreciate that, Ari. Thank you.
As I told Jay, I made some modifications and simplified it. So you won't have to deal with angels or anything like that yet. That comes after. I tried to use them before, but I think it's better to do that later. Right now, the suits and the rulers are what you integrate. In other words, we begin with the aces, and the aces represent the elements and the suits, the tarot suits of the minor arcana. And these are connected with the rulers. So, according to the Lesser Key of Solomon, the way the secret seal of Solomon is interpreted by yours truly, you first face the south direction in order to kind of establish the elemental orientation, because the rulers aren't necessarily connected to the elements, but they can connect to the elements through you, because the elements in this case are a tangible manifestation of your own yin organ energies. That's why I use them, because These elements now, I use the Taoist elements, I don't use the Hermetic ones. The fire is in the middle, and that represents the soul energy. Around, you have swords equal metal, wands equal wood, cups equal water, and pentacles equal earth. So you have the wands and the swords now. They're very different. The swords aren't the wands aren't fire, and the swords aren't air. And it works very, very good because, first of all, the tarot themselves came from China, and then they moved down to India, and from there to Arabia, et cetera, et cetera. But these archetypes are compatible with the Taoist elemental system, probably more than they are with the Western elemental system, the Aristotelian one. The difference is that we are adapting it to the Western elemental system. So instead of Earth being in the center, you have fire being in the center. And fire is golden, and Earth is amber. But the red element comes with the metal. Why? Because metal conducts heat the best. So the soul fire and any fire on the outside is going to conduct through the metal first because that's what's going to draw it. It's not going to go with water, which completely repels it. It'll heat the water if you have an elemental cauldron, which is metal. See, the symbolism perfectly describes these interactions. And you will see when you cultivate your organ energy, you can transform this energy into the tarot suit, into the ace. And from the ace, you can connect it into now we're going into Kabbalism. You'll be able to connect it with Elohim Haim, which is the Elohim of life. This is the primary manifestation in the Sefer Yetzirah that is associated with the first Sephirah, the Sephirah of the crown, which is actually the most internal Sephirah. In the three-dimensional system of the Sefer Yetzirah, you don't have a two-dimensional tree of life. One of the phrases just says, "Oh, and this is the tree form of the 10 Sephiroth, and the tree form is like a flow chart." That's how it means it. But you can also use the two-dimensional version for other purposes. I use it myself. In any case, it's going to be organ fusion. You don't have to worry about angels and archetypes and all of that. However, once you complete the system, you will be able to correlate everything with the tarot that organizes it all because everything that you will be doing is connected to the alchemy of the minor arcana. Why? Because the minor arcana has 10 numbers associated with the 10 Sephiroth, and each of these has a specific aspect of cultivation or discipline. The first four are elemental. Uh, well, actually, the first one is spiritual. The next three are elemental. And then the final six are directional. And you will be exploring the archetype of the east, the archetype of the north, et cetera, the archetype of above and below as alchemical or cultivational processes. That way, you will completely own and integrate with the directional three-dimensional space, sacred space, and the way the jinn are going to move in. The situation is much more simplified. All you have to do is organ fusion, and I don't do organ fusion. I need to learn it. I've been I've reached a certain point with it, but I never like pushed enough. Um, However, if you can if you can if you don't do organ fusion, you can still connect with the elements, with the suits and the aces. However, there may be issues of energetic impurity or toxicity from environmental influences or whatever, and your own psychology and your karma and the relations with others. So that may create inconsistencies. The elemental fusion is for those who don't use mantras like I do, for example. So for me, mantras can probably compensate. I've done so many of them and activated them, and they do work, but they kind of take up all of your time. Um, However, this kind of thing, once you get the suits tuned into the organ energies and the virtues, You don't need the angels for now. In the future, however, once you finish with the number cards from 1 to 10 in the array, then you will go to the court cards. The king, queen, prince and princess, or knight and page, however you want to organize it. And these represent 4 divine aspects. Those are spirit, the divine feminine, the will, the heart aspect, which balances the two. That's like the offspring of the two. And the body aspect, which is the knight, which is the executor, the acting agent within manifestation. And that acting agent is going to be the 4 jinn that rule the quarters that are associated with the royal stars. This is Belith, Asmodee, Belial, and Paimon. Now, that's getting into the deeper end. So in order to get all the 4 court cards in harmony, you need the number cards to go around first, and those have to do with the 72 jinn. After that, you have the angels, which are the kings, the spirit cards, the goddesses, which are the other card, which are the queens, and the princesses or pages are the heart, which are represented in this system by the Egyptian deities that guard the funerary services, the 4 canopic guardians. I've chosen that because it actually works and the symbolism fits perfectly. Also, there's a strong Egyptian influence within the jinn. Anyways, Tara, you're very welcome. And this is going to be much simpler than before. I had to explain that to Jay a few times because I did confuse you guys, but now things are far more organized. And maybe you sense it. You go, okay, when you get your shit together, you call me, okay? Or I'll come to you because I'll sense it. And that's good that you did. Let's see. You're going to give us the concluding arguments. I've already said my adios amigos. I'll see y'all next time.
Well, thanks for that, Ari. So it's been great catching up with you both and getting back into this crazy work adventure with the DJs. I do appreciate all of your advice, and I'll definitely be in touch again soon with more feedback and lots of questions. So until we meet again, see you, Ari. See you, Dr. J. Tara out.